Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man wala. Dear brothers and sisters, inshallah continuing this series called 30 Books in 30 Days. Yesterday I spoke to you about a book in Islamic history that I had recommended for every Muslim home. And inshallah today I would like to recommend another book in the same subject, which is the subject of Islamic history. And this book is called The Book of Islamic Dynasties. The Book of Islamic Dynasties. That's the main title of the book. The full title is The Book of Islamic Dynasties, A Celebration of Islamic History and Culture. It's written by an author named Luqman Naji. He's a professor. He has a graduate degree in library science and education from the University of British Columbia, and several other degrees as well from different parts of the world. And this book, it's not a very long book. It's about 190 pages or so, but there's a long glossary and index at the end, so it's closer to like 150 pages. And the difference between this book and yesterday's book is this is more of a quick reference book. What he does is he goes through all the major Islamic dynasties, starting with the Umayyads. Okay, so he doesn't start with the Prophet ﷺ. He skips the Seerah and the Khulafa al-Rashidin. He starts after the Khulafa al-Rashidin. So he begins with the Umayyad dynasty, and what he does is he will mention the name of every king that came in the dynasty, and he'll have a paragraph or so about what are the major events that happened during the reign of that king. He'll mention the name of the king, when he came into power, and when he died or left power, and what are the major events that happened during his reign. And he will go through the different kings one by one until he finished the Umayyad dynasty in Syria. And then, for those of you who are familiar with the Umayyad history, the Abbasids took over, and the Umayyads fled and went to Spain. And they established their dynasty in Spain, in Andalusia. So he continues the Umayyad dynasty in Spain from 756 to 1031. Then he talks about the Abbasids, and then he talks about the other major dynasties such as the Fatimids and the Seljuks and the Ayyubis and the Mamluk and the Ottomans and the Safavids and the Mughals and others as well. So all the way down to the Mughals of India. And he does it in the same way, mentioning king by king by king and what are the major events that happened in those eras. So it's a good book to use as a reference, and also to read up a brief snippet of what are the major events that happened during each of these times. It also gives you a quick overview of how the different dynasties came to rise and then fell. How they came to rise and then fell. And I'll tell you what the author says in the introduction about this book and why he wrote it, so that you get an idea of, how he approaches Islamic history. So first he quotes an American philosopher, George Santayana, who said that those who ignore history are doomed to repeat it. Those who ignore history are doomed to repeat it. So this is the driving force behind him writing this book. He wants people to read what has happened in Islamic history so that we don't repeat the same mistakes that were made in the past. He says this book is an attempt to present in one concise volume an introduction to the many great Islamic dynasties that have arisen, shone, and faded like stars in the firmament, but have left the Muslim world all the richer. It attempts to record the history of some of the changes that took place in these varied societies, and to note the revolutions and uprisings by one set of people against another, with the resulting kingdoms and states. The subtitle, A Celebration of Islamic History and Culture, reflects the importance of the great cultural legacy left behind by each of the dynasties discussed. In the globalized world of the 20th... Okay, so I'm going to skip this part. Then he says later that the present work also aims to enlighten its readers as to some of the enormous contributions made by Muslims to world civilization. Each Islamic dynasty had its periods of strength, which led to the social stability that encouraged the blossoming of Islamic culture. This book is primarily intended as a reference work for anyone, young or old. And this is important because it's a book that I enjoy as much as my 13-year-old enjoys, as much as my 8-year-old enjoys. Okay? So it is a reference work for anyone, young or old, interested in acquiring a basic knowledge of the major Islamic dynasties. And then he says at the end of the introduction, to fully understand events happening today in the Islamic world and elsewhere, to fully understand events that are happening today in the Islamic world and elsewhere, Muslims must know their history. History does tend to repeat itself, but I am of the belief that lessons can be learned and that mistakes made in the past do not necessarily have to be repeated. One more thing I'll say about this book is that there's a lot of illustrations in this book. A lot of illustrations, you know. And these illustrations are very helpful for people who are visual learners. And, you know, it prevents the book from being boring. You know, so you read a little bit, and then you have a picture in front of you, and there's a little bit snippet at the bottom about the picture that's there. So a lot of beautiful illustrations that kind of take us back in time to visualize what things used to be like. So I highly recommend this book as something to keep in your home and to read it as light reading every now and then. You know, pick up the book, read a few pages, some really interesting things that you didn't know about our glorious history and glorious past. And it just makes you more appreciative of the wonderful contributions that the Muslims have made in the history of humanity. So I'll have this book here, inshallah, if you would like to take a look at it. جزاكم الله خيرا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.